Have you ever sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the afternoon, staring at your phone, wondering if today might be the day someone calls just to see how you are? Not because they need something, not because it's your birthday, just because they remembered you and they care. That silence, it can be louder than anything. You try to brush it off. Tell yourself everyone's busy. You think back to when the house used to be filled with voices, laughter, little feet running up and down the hallway. Back then, you barely had a moment to yourself. Now, sometimes all you have are moments, so many that you begin to wonder, did I give too much and ask for too little? You see, there's a pain that isn't easily spoken aloud, the kind that creeps in slowly. It's not anger or bitterness, it's more subtle than that. It's the quiet ache of being forgotten, the invisible weight of feeling like you no longer matter the way you once did. No one prepares you for this chapter. People talk about retirement plans, empty nests, maybe even traveling. But they don't talk about the deep, human need to still feel seen, to still feel like you belong to someone's heart. And it doesn't make you weak. Feeling this way doesn't mean you're needy. It means you're human. We all want connection. We all want to feel like someone still thinks of us when they hear a song or smell something familiar from the kitchen. That's not selfish, it's soul deep. I remember a woman I once met. Her name was Grace. She had this light in her eyes, even at 72. But one day, over coffee, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, I raised 3 children. I gave them everything I had. But now, I feel like I'm just a line item on their to-do list. A quick call on a Sunday, a rushed visit during the holidays. I love them. But sometimes, I wonder if they remember who I am, not just as their mother, but as a person. Her words stayed with me because they're not just hers. They're shared quietly by so many mothers, fathers, even lifelong friends who find themselves on the edges of other people's lives. And maybe you felt that too. The hardest part isn't the silence. It's what the silence starts to whisper. That you don't matter, that you're just waiting for someone to remember. But here's what I want to say to you gently, and with every bit of truth I can offer, you are not forgotten. Even if they don't call, even if no one knocks on your door, your worth doesn't live in someone else's schedule. There is strength deep, steady strength in choosing not to let someone else's absence define your value. It begins quietly, with something so small it might not even seem like a step. It's simply this, acknowledging your own need, not brushing it away, not pretending you don't care, but sitting with it, honestly, and saying, yes, I miss being checked on. Yes, it hurts sometimes, but I can learn to hold myself with compassion instead of waiting for someone else to do it. That's the first way we begin to stay emotionally strong when no one checks in. We stop pretending we're invincible. We stop putting on the brave face that says, I'm fine, when deep down we're not. Strength doesn't mean hiding your feelings. It means letting them breathe. It means holding your own hand, metaphorically, and saying, it's okay to want more. And it's also okay to give that to myself. Take Margaret, for instance. She's 68 now. Her son moved to another country a few years back. And while he calls, it's sporadic. For a long time, she'd keep her phone beside her every night, just in case. She couldn't sleep well, always waiting, always hoping. One day, she told herself, I can't keep living in the spaces between other people's choices. So she bought herself a small notebook. Every evening, she wrote one thing she did that day that made her proud. Not for anyone else, just for her. Sometimes it was as simple as making a really good soup, or walking a little further than usual, or smiling at a stranger. It didn't bring her son closer, but it brought her closer to herself. And slowly, that made all the difference. Because Margaret began to matter again, not in someone else's eyes, but in her own. The second way we stay strong, we begin to reclaim the parts of ourselves we've shelved, the passions, the hobbies, the pieces of identity that got wrapped up in being everything for everyone else. Remember when you used to dance in the kitchen, or paint, or write letters, or take long walks just to feel the sun on your skin? Those aren't silly things. Those are lifelines, threads of who you are, and sometimes when the world outside feels distant. Those little acts of self-return are the exact things that bring you home again. There's a man, I know Frank, he's 74, used to be a mechanic, spent decades taking care of his family. After his wife passed, and his daughter got busy with her own life, he found himself in a quiet house that echoed more than it comforted. But then he started building birdhouses. Just one at first, then another. Soon, he had a small line of them on his back porch, painted in bright colors. He didn't do it to sell. He didn't post them online. He just liked watching birds come visit. It gave him something beautiful to tend to, something that didn't require anyone else's permission or attention. That's the heart of this journey. It's not about convincing others to see you. It's about seeing yourself fully, lovingly. Every line on your face tells a story. Every wrinkle holds a moment of love, laughter, or grief endured. You are a tapestry of everything you've lived through. And while it's true some people drift away, distracted by their own lives, it doesn't mean your story has ended. You are still here. You still matter. And there is still beauty waiting to be made in your name. There's something that happens when we spend a lifetime caring for others. We get used to putting ourselves second or maybe third. Or last, it becomes second nature. And we tell ourselves it's love. That love means saying yes. That love means showing up no matter what, even when we're tired, even when no one shows up for us in return. But sometimes, what we call love is really fear in disguise. Fear that if we say no, they'll stop loving us. Fear that if we ask for more, we'll lose what little we already have. Fear that if we stop bending over backwards, we'll be left behind entirely. It's not something we talk about openly, but many of us, especially those who gave their hearts to raising children, building marriages, maintaining friendships, have built an identity around being needed. And when that need disappears, we feel a little lost. Helen, a retired nurse, told me once, I spent my entire life saying yes. Yes to extra shifts. Yes to family birthdays I didn't have energy for. Yes to helping with the grandkids every weekend. But now, when I finally have time for myself, I don't know who I am without a request to fulfill. That feeling of disappearing into the roles you played, it doesn't go away easily. It's why, even now, when no one checks in, part of you might still instinctively reach out, offer help, bake something, send a message just to feel connected again. And none of that is wrong. Generosity is beautiful. Your heart is not the problem. The pain begins when your giving becomes a currency you trade in for love. When you give not out of joy, but out of fear that otherwise you'll be forgotten. So how do we shift that? It begins with a pause, a long, honest breath, and a question. If I didn't feel afraid of being alone, what would I still choose to give? That's where truth begins to rise. Because it turns out, your kindness is even more powerful when it's not tethered to fear. When it comes from fullness, not emptiness. Caleb, a 66-year-old widower, had always been the glue in his family, the one who planned reunions, reminded people of birthdays, called his siblings every week, and slowly, he noticed something. If he didn't reach out, no one did. If he didn't organize things, nothing happened. At first, it crushed him. Was I the only one holding this together? He asked me. Was any of it real? But instead of rushing to fill the silence, he chose to listen to it, to let it speak. And in that silence, he realized something hard, but liberating. He was exhausted from carrying all the weight. So he began practicing what he called loving detachment. He didn't stop caring, but he stopped chasing. He stopped initiating every call, every plan, every reminder. And in the space that opened, he began doing things that nurtured him. He joined a local photography group, learned to cook meals he'd always wanted to try. He didn't stop loving his family. He just stopped proving it by burning himself out. And you know what happened? After a while, his daughter noticed. She called and asked, "Dad, are you okay? You haven't texted the family in a while." He smiled and said, "I'm doing well, sweetheart. Just learning to take care of myself a little more." That moment didn't erase all the years of imbalance, but it marked a change, a shift in energy. And sometimes, that's all it takes. When you begin to respect your own energy, your own time, your own needs, the world starts to adjust around you. Not because you demand it, but because you've changed the unspoken agreement. People treat us the way we treat ourselves. And that's not about blame, it's about power. Quiet, personal power. Jack, a 70-year-old grandfather, shared something that struck me deeply. He said, "I used to think setting boundaries meant I was being selfish, but now I realize it's how I teach people to love me better." That truth isn't always easy to apply, especially if you were raised in a time when boundaries were considered rude or ungrateful. But boundaries aren't walls. They're doors, and they only open when there's respect on both sides. It can be as simple as saying, "I'm not available right now, but I'd love to talk later." Or, "I'd rather not discuss that topic." Or even, "I need some time for myself today." Small phrases, quiet power. You don't need to yell to be heard. And here's the beautiful irony. When you stop bending yourself out of shape to fit other people's comfort, they begin to feel your shape more clearly. They begin to see you not as a convenience, but as a whole person, someone with preferences, boundaries, passions, and depth. That's the third way we grow stronger when no one checks in. We stop abandoning ourselves in hopes of being chosen by someone else. You've been enough all along. Maybe you just forgot. Maybe you were so busy loving others that you misplaced the map back to yourself, but it's never too late to return. Ryan, an artist in his early 70s, told me something that stuck with me ever since. "I used to think my kids were my life, and maybe, for a long time, they were, but I forgot I had a life. To one that doesn't end just because their focus shifted. He started painting again, not to sell, not for praise, just for the sheer joy of creating. And in doing so, he found a new way to feel seen not by others, but by the part of himself that had waited patiently all those years. So if you're feeling forgotten, unloved, unacknowledged, I want you to know this. You don't have to wait for someone else to validate your existence. You can wake up tomorrow and choose to honor your own voice, not by shouting it into a void, but by listening to it within. You can water the garden of your spirit with your own hands. You can start showing up for yourself the way you once showed up for everyone else. And when that shift happens, when you stop living for a call that may never come, you begin to build a life that doesn't depend on someone else's schedule of affection. That's not loneliness. That's liberation. And it begins not with force, but with quiet decisions. The ones that say, I will no longer shrink to be acceptable. I will no longer chase crumbs when I can prepare a feast for my own soul. Something begins to shift, not loudly, not all at once, but deeply and unmistakably, when you stop chasing the old rhythms and start dancing to your own quiet music again. It might begin with something as small as sitting by the window with your morning tea, no longer feeling rushed to call, or plan, or prove your worth. It might be the first time you walk into the garden without thinking of who might visit, and instead think of what brings you joy today. These are not grand gestures. They're quiet acts of reclamation. You stop needing to be needed, and instead, you start simply being. There's a peace that rises from this shift, and oddly enough, that peace doesn't push people away, it draws them in. Not because you're trying to be magnetic, but because peace has a gravity of its own. Take Chloe. For example, she's 71. Her daughter used to call only when something was wrong, when the kids were sick, when work was overwhelming, when she needed someone to vent to. Chloe always answered, always soothed, always dropped everything. But one day, Chloe realized she'd become more of an emotional fire extinguisher than a mother. So she made a decision not out of anger, but out of clarity. She began answering the phone only when she felt emotionally available. She started saying, I love you, but I don't have the energy for this conversation right now. At first, her daughter was shocked, confused, even, but over time, something incredible happened. The calls became less chaotic, more thoughtful. Her daughter began asking how Chloe was doing something she hadn't done in years. Why? Because Chloe had changed the energy. She had moved from reactive to rooted, from being on call to being whole. When we carry ourselves with quiet dignity, People notice. It might take time. It might not be dramatic, but presence always speaks louder than performance. Grace doesn't beg for attention. Grace commands it without a single demand. It's a delicate thing to stop measuring your worth by someone else's attention. But the moment you do, you become radiant in a way that no one can ignore. And even if they do continue to overlook you, something essential has changed. You no longer abandon yourself in their absence. You learn to light your own lamp. Hannah, who spent most of her adult life running a family bakery, used to dread Sundays. That used to be the day everyone would gather her children, their spouses, the grandkids, the laughter, the mess, the warmth. But over the past couple of years, the visits thinned out. Excuses piled up. There was always something, a birthday party, a deadline, a new activity. She found herself cooking the same recipes, setting out the same plates, just in case someone stopped by. Then one Sunday, she stopped. She made herself a single cup of tea, lit a candle, and read a novel in her garden. That evening, she called a neighbor she'd been meaning to invite over for months, and they sat outside and shared stories over fresh scones. It wasn't the same as family, but it was real, and it was enough. She stopped waiting for the old memories to return, and instead started making new ones. That's the fourth way we stay strong, by creating our own emotional home. Even if the rooms we once filled with others now echo with silence, we are not empty houses. We are living hearts, and we get to decide what fills our days. This doesn't mean giving up on others. It doesn't mean closing the door to connection. It simply means removing the pressure, the ache, the sense of being unfinished without someone else's attention. You begin to see your life as yours again, not as a placeholder for someone else's convenience. And here's where the world begins to feel it. Sometimes your adult children start calling more, not because you reminded them, but because they can sense you're no longer waiting. There's something in your voice now, a steadiness, a joy that isn't dependent on them, and that joy is magnetic. Sometimes, the people who once overlooked you begin to ask questions. What's new with you, Mom? Or you sound happy, Dad. What's been going on? And you find yourself telling them not about your loneliness or your disappointments, but about your small adventures, your new routines, your rekindled passions. You stop being someone to pity and start being someone to admire. This isn't a game. It's not about pretending you don't care when you do. It's about learning that caring for yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. And yes, some people might never come back around. Some relationships may not be healed in this lifetime, but you get to live a full and meaningful life anyway. You get to wake up with purpose. Even if no one texts, you get to laugh out loud at a movie. Even if the seat next to you is empty, you get to dress up for yourself, cook for yourself, celebrate yourself because your life matters. Even if no one claps, there's a strength in stillness, a courage in choosing your own joy, a dignity in not chasing what doesn't return your light. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. It's not too late to rewrite the energy of your days. You've already done the hard part, loving deeply, giving endlessly. Now it's time to let some of that love return inward. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And even if the world sometimes forgets to call, you still get to live a life worth answering to. If you've made it here, if you're still with me, I want to thank you deeply and sincerely, not just for watching, but for allowing yourself to feel, for letting these words sit with you, stir you, and maybe, just maybe, soften something inside. You didn't have to stay. You could have scrolled past, looked away, gone on pretending everything's fine, but you didn't. You stayed, and that tells me something important. It tells me that part of you knows, truly knows that you deserve more than silence, more than waiting, more than being forgotten. It means you're ready, maybe not to change everything at once, but to change something, to choose yourself, even in the smallest of ways. So I want to ask you something, not as a stranger on a screen, but as someone who sees the ache and the strength that can live inside the same heart. Has your relationship with your children or your family, or your closest people changed over time? What did that feel like for you? And more importantly, what helped you survive it? What helped you stay whole? If you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments below. Not for attention, not to be fixed, but because your story might be the lifeline someone else didn't know they needed today. Sometimes healing begins with simply being heard. And here, in this small corner of the internet, I want to make space for that. I've read hundreds of stories like yours. Stories of parents who gave everything and got silence in return. Of friendships that faded. Of days spent waiting for a phone call that never came. And I've also read stories of transformation, of rediscovery, of people who stopped waiting and started living again. You might be surprised how many people feel exactly like you do, but haven't said it aloud. So please know, if something in this video made you feel less alone, if it made you feel seen, if it gave even a flicker of comfort or strength, you're not just welcome here. You belong here. I hope you'll stay connected. Not out of obligation, but because we need more spaces like this. Quiet, truthful spaces. Places where strength doesn't always roar, but simply shows up with tenderness, with honesty, with resilience. If you feel called to, go ahead and click the subscribe button. It's not just about numbers, it's about building a small circle of souls who are walking similar paths. And you're a part of that now. If you'd like to be reminded gently every now and then that you matter, that you still carry light, even in the quietest of seasons, I'd love to keep speaking with you through these videos. Because here's something no one tells you. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself who kept giving and giving in hopes someone would notice. You are allowed to become the person who notices themselves instead, and maybe you've spent years tending to everyone else's garden. Now it's your turn, your time to bloom again, in your own season, at your own pace, not to prove anything, not to be chosen, but because your soul still has color left in it, still has laughter, still has stories to tell, meals to cook, paths to walk, and days worth living deeply. Let the silence no longer be an enemy, but a companion, a space where you rediscover what has always been there. You, let your presence be enough. Let your joy be your own. And if the phone doesn't ring today, that doesn't mean love has stopped existing. It just means that you get to begin loving yourself in a way you may never have been taught before. Not the loud kind, not the kind that seeks applause, but the kind that sits with you in the early morning light and whispers, "You're still here." And that's more than enough. So, from my heart to yours, thank you. Thank you for your resilience. Thank you for the way you've kept going. Even when it was hard, thank you for letting yourself be part of this conversation and for being open to hearing your own heart speak again. I hope today feels just a little lighter than yesterday. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. You're still growing. You're still worthy. And you are never, ever truly alone. We'll talk again soon. Until then, take gentle care of yourself. And remember, you are not forgotten. You are finally being remembered by the one person who matters most. You